Okay, so we are going to study Bose-Einstein statistics, which is part of this CC614. এই ছবিটা হচ্ছে খুব ফেমাস Bose-Einstein কনডেনসেশনের ছবি। তো we'll eventually have a very qualitative, a sketchy idea of what Bose-Einstein, because Bose-Einstein condensation is a very vast topic. People actually write entire thesis papers on Bose-Einstein condensation, but we will just touch upon what it actually is. Okay, before we go into the topic, as I told you, we will not go into Bose-Einstein statistics today. We will just discuss some topics which will help us build up the the way to finally reach Bose-Einstein statistics. So we will go through some definitions initially. I don't know whether you have already gone through these definitions in Bappa sir's class, because he is doing the classical statistics part, and after I made 2 or 3 slides, I saw that in the syllabus these are already there in part 1. So maybe these are some repetitions, but for my reference, I would refer to certain terms which I thought I define for you myself, so that it is easier for me and you to understand when I'm mentioning a certain term what it actually is. Maybe these first few definitions are a repetition for you. You may have already done it when you were doing when classical statistical mechanics was introduced to you, but nevertheless it doesn't matter really. So first definition is degrees of freedom. Now we have an idea about degrees of freedom from our mechanics class, right? We know that the number of coordinates that are required to define a particle completely in space are called its degrees of freedom. So if we are trying to define the location of a particle in 3-dimensional space, then the number of degrees of freedom required is 3, xyz. On the other hand, if there is some constraint on the particle, that the particle can move only on a plane, okay, so then the number of degrees of freedom reduces to 2, because you have given one constraint. So number of degrees of freedom f minus the constant gives you the new number of degrees of freedom. So that is the point of view from mechanics. And I think you have also done generalized coordinates, where you spend quite a lot of time, commendable amount of time, on understanding degrees of freedom. Just again for your information, in one of my interviews, the panel actually gave me different systems and asked me what the degree of freedom, the number of degree of freedom of that particular system was. Okay, so this is also a very basic question that you may be asked in interviews, and I'm telling you this because you are on the verge of finishing your uh, undergraduate course. So please have a very basic idea and clear idea about these. For example, if someone asks you what is the degree of freedom of a diatomic molecule, then you must not fumble. You must at once be able to say, or at least derive on the board, that diatomic molecule, so 2 molecules each has 3 plus 3 is 6, but there is a constant, so final degree of freedom is this. Okay, so you must know the concept must be very clear. You must not fumble in these basic things if you are asked such questions. Getting asked such questions in interviews are both advantageous and disadvantageous, precisely because of the fact advantageous, because if your concept is clear, you give the answer at once. But if your concept is not clear, then the interviewer has a very negative impression of you, thinking that this person does not have the faintest idea of such a fundamental thing. Okay, so this is something that you must keep in mind. Anyway, so now we look at this term degrees of freedom from a statistical mechanics point of view. So basically, if you think about the simplest system, that is a monoatomic gas, then in its energy expression, there are F coordinates of position and F coordinates of momentum. Okay, so from the statistical mechanics point of view, the number of degrees of freedom is related to the number of coordinates that are there in its energy expression. So we say that the system consisting of a single molecule has F degrees of freedom. Okay, if the system has n molecules, then the energy expression will contain nf coordinates of position and nf coordinates of momentum, and then we would say it has nf degrees of freedom. So I hope you can understand the subtle difference between the way we define degrees of freedom in StatMech and classical, in our normal classical mechanics. There we are thinking in terms of the freedom of movement of the particle. Here we are thinking in terms of energy. Okay, I hope this is clear. So please keep this idea in your mind. This is a very important concept. If you are asked what is degree of freedom of a particle, and if you give this expression, this definition, then it's not wrong. You have to know yourself that this definition is from the StatMech point of view, and the other definition that I told you in the beginning is from the classical mechanics point of view. Okay, next, position space. What is position space? We will talk about spaces a lot when we are doing StatMech. So what is the first of spaces is this position space, and you are all acquainted with the position space. We have been working in the position space from our first SEM, when we started vector analysis in Cartesian coordinates, and then we moved to curvilinear coordinates. So all of you know what a position space is. To completely specify the position of a particle in the three-dimensional space, we must know the ordered triad called the Cartesian coordinates x, y, z, which are mutually perpendicular to each other. So this all of you know. Now, if the system comprises of n such particles, then the knowledge of 3n coordinates will give you a complete information about the system. Obviously, provided the system is static. Okay. So this is not the definition. This part in italics is the definition. The three-dimensional space in which the location of a particle is completely given by the three position coordinates is known as the position space. Okay, so you already knew this. This is just something that I sort of reminded you again. And an elemental volume in the position space is denoted by dV equal to dx dy dz. Again, and if we go to other curvilinear coordinates, finally we talk in terms, the basic derivation is done in terms of the Cartesian coordinates, using which we find out the unit vectors etc. in the curvilinear coordinates. Okay, so basic space is still Cartesian, and the elemental volume or infinitesimal volume is denoted by dV equal to dx dy dz. Okay. Next we go to momentum space. Now momentum space you have come across a little bit while doing quantum mechanics, where we talked about the wave function in the position space, and then again derived the same thing in momentum space, right? So what is momentum space? If the system under consideration is dynamic, suppose earlier we said the system is static. Now suppose the system that we are considering is a dynamic system. So the particles along with their positions will also have different velocities, and therefore they will all have certain momenta. And then the specification of the position coordinates alone will not be sufficient to describe the system. And in this case, along with the position coordinates x, y, z, the momentum coordinates px, py, pz must also be specified, where we all know that px is the momentum along the x-axis mvx, py is mvy, pz is mvz. Okay. So this is the final definition of momentum space, the three-dimensional space in which momentum of a particle is completely given by the three mutually perpendicular momentum coordinates is known as the momentum space. What will be the volume of an infinitesimal element in the momentum space? We denote it by dVp given by dpx, dpy, dpz. Okay, so the axes are px, py, pz, and then elemental volume is given by dpx, dpy, dpz. Okay. Next comes the new thing, that is phase space. We have so long dealt with only 3D spaces. Only I remember once when I was doing quantum mechanics, I think in last semester, I talked to you a little bit about n-dimensional space. Remember when we discussed Hilbert space and infinite dimensional space, and we switched from the wave representation to matrix representation of uh, uh, states of a system. I had told you a little bit about n-dimensional space. Okay, so phase space is one special case of such n-dimensional space. What is phase space? The combination of position and momentum space is known as phase space. So if you have a system which is dynamic and you want to completely specify both the location and the momentum of a particle, then you have to represent it in phase space. Okay, so a phase space is a 6-dimensional space. So remember, now we are elevating from 3 dimensions to 6 dimensions. Jump from 3 to 6. Okay, it's a 6-dimensional space, 3 for position, 3 for momenta, all mutually perpendicular. Now it is a very difficult thing to visualize. You cannot visualize a 6-dimensional space with all mutually perpendicular axes. In fact, a 6-dimensional space does not exist in reality. In reality, only 3D space exists, but it's a mathematical concept and it is required for mathematical analysis of system. So the location of a particle in the 6-dimensional space will be specified by the 6 coordinates x, y, z, px, py, pz. So now instead of an ordered triad like x, y, z or px, py, pz, you have to specify all the 6 coordinates. If you are in the phase space, then the coordinate of a particle is given by 6 quantities, not 3. X, Y, Z, Px, Py, Pz is the complete representation of a particle in the phase space. And what will be the volume? Elemental volume is denoted by d tau, and it is the product of all these elemental increments in the 6 mutually perpendicular directions. So elemental volume in phase space is d tau equal to dx, dy, dz, dpx, dpy, dpz. Is this clear to everybody up to phase space? Now we will move to the mu space. Okay, so we had phase position space, which we were already aware of. Then we got momentum space, which also we were a little bit aware of. Then we moved to phase space, which is a combination of position and momentum. And now we move on to the mu space. And in the mu space, we will be able to sort of define the minimum size of a particular cell in the phase space. Particular cell means the minimum volume that is occupied, that may be occupied in a phase space cell. So for a system comprising of a single molecule, okay, just one molecule, monoatomic molecule, the coordinates x, y, z, px, py, pz completely specify its state in the phase space. Again, the energy of this single molecule is given by, since it is moving about, so its energy is entirely kinetic. So its energy is given by 1 by 2n px square plus py square plus pz square. So the energy of the molecule is obtained from momentum space. So the momentum space not only gives us an sorry so a definition, or rather a specification of its momentum at a particular moment, but also its energy at that particular moment. Okay, the six-dimensional space for a single particle is called the molecular space or mu space. Okay, so when we are in the so the mu space is sort of a variety of the phase space where we are dealing with just a single particle. Okay, a six-dimensional phase space for a single particle is called the molecular space or mu space. If the position of the molecule is changed slightly, then the phase point will undergo a displacement in the phase space. Okay, so suppose this is our phase space for a particular molecule. Okay, this is the x axis and this is the momentum axis. Now this is just one energy sheet. This is called a two-dimensional energy sheet. In the phase space or in the mu space, there will be three such energy sheets. Have you understood? In the actual phase space, now what do we do when we are in three-dimensional, when we are doing say three-dimensional problem in the position space? What do we do for simplicity? We take only movement along the x direction, right? And we do the problem and then we transfer to 3D. When we are in phase space, you cannot single out just one direction. To single out to the simplest form, you have to single out one direction of position and one direction of momentum. So we have chosen xpx, and such a plane or lamina is called a two-dimensional energy sheet, where these colored boxes are boxes where the particle may exist. Okay, so the colored boxes show you the occupied cells. A single particle, if we are in the mu space, we are talking about a single particle and it is moving about and it may occupy one of these colored boxes. Okay, so the length of the side of such a box, a unit box in this energy sheet, is dpx along the px axis and dx along the x axis. Okay, so one phase cell in the 2D energy sheet will be of area dx dpx. But if you take the entire phase space, then the volume of the phase cell will be given by dx dy dz, dpx dpy dpz. Okay. Now in classical limits, the smallest size of a phase space cell is denoted by a constant h naught. Dx dpx equal to h naught. Okay. And there is no limit to the smallness of this number. There is h naught can be chosen arbitrarily in classical limits and it can be as small as you chose. When classical statistical mechanics was being formulated, the value of h naught was arbitrarily chosen to be of the order of 10 to the power minus 30 arc second or 10 to the power minus 35 arc second or even smaller. Okay, the unit was important, arc second. It has to be the unit of energy multiplied with time. Okay, but the value, the actual magnitude could be as small as possible. Okay, have you got the concept of this phase space and what is a phase space cell? Okay, we'll come to it again later on. Any questions from this particular slide? Okay,
No, ma'am.
we'll move on. Okay. Now in quantum limits, the smallest size of a phase space cell is limited by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, because in quantum limits, in when we are doing when we are applying quantum mechanics, we know that Heisenberg's uncertainty principle has to be followed. So the product of dx dpx can at most be at most in the sense that the minimum value of dx dpx has to be h. It cannot be less than that, because that is the limit, that is the restriction given by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The errors cannot be any less than that depicted by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So this is a restriction imposed in quantum mechanics, that the cell size of a particular cell in a 2D energy sheet may be dx dpx equal to h, dy dpy equal to h, dz dpz equal to h. Okay, if the coordinates are complementary, then they have to obey HUP, where h we know of course is Planck's constant, and it is not an arbitrary value, it has a specified value. And just in our last class we saw how the first value of Planck's constant was remember, discovered experimentally, calculated, not discovered, calculated. So the phase space volume, that is dx dy dz dpx dpy dz, is now equal to hq. Okay, so again this is a particular value which cannot be it cannot be less than this value, because h is the minimum value of dx dpx or dy dpy or dz dpz. Now in the quantum statistical treatment, therefore, in accordance with the uncertainty principle, the coordinates of a particle in the phase space may be specified only to the extent lying within an element of volume HQ. We cannot make a cell smaller than this. Now this has very far-fetched implication, as we will see. And finally, I will talk about the gamma space. I will just mention what a gamma space is, because I went through your syllabus and saw that we don't require the gamma space that much. If we find that we require gamma space explanation more than what is here, then I will do it as and when the time comes. Now, what is the gamma space? In the phase space or in the mu space, the mu space is the phase space for one single particle containing one molecule. Okay. Now, for a system of n molecules, what can we do? We can take the 6-dimensional phase space and represent n molecules by n points. Clear? We take the 6-dimensional phase space, and then for n molecules, suppose there are 3 molecules, then in the 6D space, we take 3 points, each representing the coordinates of a particular molecule. This is the phase space representation. However, there is another kind of representation where you introduce the 6n dimensional space called gamma space, in which a single point will represent the state of all the n molecules. So instead of the 6-dimensional space with n points representing each molecule, we switch to a new space which is not 6-dimensional but 6n dimensional. So if you have 3 molecules to represent, you go to the 9-dimensional space, 6n, 6 into 3 equal to 9. And in the 9-dimensional space, only one point can be the representation of all the 3 molecules. Do you get me? You want me to repeat this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, this is very abstract, I know, and very difficult to understand, simply because of the fact that it is very difficult, it is impossible to visualize, not difficult. So what was phase space? In phase space, we had 6 dimensions, x, y, z, px, py, pz. So if you have a single molecule, for example, if we go back to um, this, where is it? If you go back to this picture here, this is phase space. 2 dimensions actually. Box is the position of the particle or the specification of the particle at a particular amount of time, point of time. At a different point of time, it will be in some other colored box, because these colored boxes are, as I told you, are the positions that the particle takes. Okay. Now, if you have, now suppose you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 19 colored boxes over here. Suppose you want to represent 19 particles at one point of time. So you go to the phase space and you take 19 such points, each point representing the position momenta of one particular particle. So you have the 6-dimensional space in which you have n points, each representing the particle. This is one kind of representation, and this is the representation in the phase space for n particles or in the mu space for a single particle. এই অবধি পরিষ্কার তো? Now I am talking about an alternate representation which is called the gamma space. The gamma space is not 6-dimensional but 6n dimensional. N take the number of particles. So over here we have 19 particles. The gamma space, in the gamma space you will have not 19 points like this but a single point, but the dimension of the space will be 6 into 19. Okay, so in the 6n dimensional space we can just use a single point to represent all n particles, because dimensions এর মধ্যেই তো n particles এর coordinates ঢুকে আছে, তাহলে জাস্ট একটা পয়েন্ট স্পেসে, ওই 6n dimensional স্পেসে একটা পয়েন্ট নিলেই তুমি ওই পার্টিকেলটার ওই পয়েন্ট অফ টাইমে স্পেসিফিকেশন পেয়ে যাবে in the gamma space. You don't need n different points, you need just one point, but you make the dimension of the space 6n. Okay, so that is gamma space for you. Now we don't, as I told you, we don't need to bother about more detail about the gamma space at this point of time. If we require to, we will come back to it again. Okay, now let us see what is the requirement of quantum mechanics. You are doing classical StatMech with BS sir right now. Quite detailed, many things explained. Then what is the requirement of quantum statistics? So just as we saw why we had to rope in quantum mechanics, although classical mechanics could explain so many things, similarly for almost similar reasons we need quantum statistics. In classical Maxwell-Boltzmann statistics, first point is that all energy levels are accessible to all particles of the system, which is not the case always. We know that all energy levels are not accessible to all particles. Then one very important point is that all particles in the system are distinguishable. You can identify each particle separately in MB statistics. Again, they do not interact with each other except during collisions. Since you are doing MB statistics, you should be knowing these. If not, these are simple points to understand that in classical statistics, first of all energy levels are accessible to all particles. There is no restriction. All particles are distinguishable. You can identify each separately, and the particles do not have any interaction with each other except during collisions. Whereas systems do exist with identical or indistinguishable particles. A system of photons, it's just a plain and simple electromagnetic wave. It consists of photons, and all photons are identical, they are indistinguishable. So basically Maxwell-Boltzmann statistics will not be able to analyze or predict results for a system consisting of photons, because in Maxwell-Boltzmann statistics, the first and foremost postulate, one of the most important postulates, is that the particles are distinguishable. If you have a system of electrons, a stream of electrons hitting a metal sheet, um, thereby emitting, say, Compton effect or something like that, they are all indistinguishable, identical particles. So again, they will not follow MB statistics. Okay, so there are systems with identical particles, and then you cannot apply MB statistics. Then Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that leads to multiplicity of energy states. If a particular cell has a restricted value of the minimum area or volume that it can have given by the quantity h, which has a strict universal magnitude, doesn't change, then that leads to multiplicity of energy states. Okay. Pauli's exclusion principle, again something that exerts a restriction on the occupancy number of a particular state. In classical statistics, one state will be occupied by a single particle or two particles. I mean, there is no restriction. But Pauli's exclusion principle clearly says that once there may be categories of particles, and for certain particles, a certain group of particles, in a single energy state, only one particle is allowed. They are very unfriendly. They do not allow others to sit with them. If there is one chair, only that particle will sit. It will not allow others to share. It will not share its space with others. Pauli's exclusion principle. That is not incorporated in MB statistics. Again, and finally, I have repeated this so many times, that experimental observations of black body radiation, photoelectric effect, specific heat of solids at low temperature, they couldn't be accounted for if you follow classical statistics. Okay. So all these points basically led to the requirement of a new statistics, and the new statistics happened to be quantum mechanical in nature. Now, quantum statistics, this is my last slide today. I have a little more to say in the introductory part, but that I'll do in the next class, because I know all the dimensional more than three-dimensional space concept is a little heavy, and the first time that you hear about it, it gets a little it takes a little time to sink in. So I'll allow that time for you to sink in into n-dimensional space, 6 n-dimensional space in fact. So quantum statistics basically is either Bose-Einstein statistics, which we will denote by BE from now on, or Fermi-Dirac statistics, which will be denoted by FD, and which will be done not by me but by BS sir. Okay. Now, Bose-Einstein statistics is very close to our heart, because you know who designed this particular statistics. S.N. Bose, Bengali, from one of the very few persons who are, in whose name we have an entire system. Okay. Remember that Bose was the first person to sort of, what should I say, formulate these statistics, and he sort of sent it, his mathematical calculation, he had sent it to Einstein. Okay. And Einstein, on reading it, saw the genius of it, and he gave it a more general form, which is why Einstein's name got attached to Bose's name, and we call it Bose-Einstein statistics. But the entire idea, যেটাকে আমরা বাংলায় বলি যে মৌলিক চিন্তা, যেটা শুরু the start, that was entirely by Bose. Okay. And just imagine, he didn't even get a Nobel Prize. This is, I think, the greatest tragedy in the history of physics. SN Bose not getting a Nobel Prize. Okay. And then the other is Fermi-Dirac statistics. All the others got. See, all the names. You even have a entire class of particles called bosons. And yet this person didn't get the Nobel Prize, which shows you why the Nobel Prize is not the ultimate feat that a scientist should aspire for. No, especially if you are Indian and dark skinned. Anyway, Fermi-Dirac statistics, again this was formulated by Fermi first, Enrico Fermi, and then Dirac gave it a more general form, which is why it is known as Fermi-Dirac statistics. Okay. When will we apply quantum statistics? When there is when the system consists of a large number of identical and indistinguishable particles. It is then that we will think about applying quantum statistics. Otherwise, if the particles are non-identical and distinguishable, then classical statistics is good enough. For applying quantum statistics, we represent the system by a wave function of a many-body state. So long we have been using wave functions of only a single particle, right? Psi of x or psi of xyz, where xyz is the coordinate of a particular particle. But now we will have to think about now we are not dealing with a single body system, we are dealing with a many body system. Statistical mechanics means we are dealing with a very large number of particles constituting a particular system. So we represent the system by the wave function psi r1, r2, r3, r4, etc. up to rn, where the ri's r1, r2, r3, etc. they are position coordinates including spin. This is very important. I should have highlighted this. Position coordinates including spin of the particles identified as 1, 2, first particle, second particle, third particle, etc. Position coordinates of these particles including spin. Okay. If the sign of the wave function remains unchanged on interchanging the coordinates of any pair of identical particles, so you have identical particles, you have no way of separately identifying one from another, recognizing one from another. Electrons, many electrons in a particular system, all of them have the same charge, same spin. How will you identify them? If by changing the position of a particular pair, so here this was my original wave function psi of r1, r2, r3, etc. What have I done? I have interchanged the position of this pair so that I get psi of r2, r1 and the rest remains same. If the interchanging of position coordinates of one pair does not change the sign of the wave function, I have changed the position coordinates of one pair in the wave function in the system, and that has not changed the sign of the wave function, then we say the wave function is symmetric and Bose-Einstein statistics will be followed. Okay. On the other hand, if the sign of the wave function does change on interchanging coordinates of any pair of identical particles, that is, again I have interchanged r1, r2, but in doing so, the sign of the wave function has changed. We call the wave function antisymmetric or antisymmetric according to Americans, and FD statistics will be followed. So if you have a large number of identical and indistinguishable particles, you apply quantum statistics. For applying quantum statistics, you represent the system by a wave function of a many-body system, where psi of r1, r2, r3, etc. is the wave function. r1, r2, r3, etc. are the coordinates, position coordinates of the respective particles, including spin. Okay. Now, so if you have a system like this up to here, then you know that you will apply quantum statistics. Now, as I told you, there are two kinds of quantum statistics. How will you determine which quantum statistics you will apply? You see whether the wave function is symmetric or anti-symmetric. How will you identify that? You just interchange the coordinates of one pair of particles. So, for simplicity, let us take the first pair. R1, R2, I interchange the position coordinates. So, the new wave function, old wave function was psi of R1, R2, R3, etc. New wave function is psi of R2, R1, R3, etc. And if you see that on doing this interchange, the sign of the wave function remains same, we say the wave function is symmetric, and then we will apply Bose-Einstein statistics. On the other hand, if on doing this interchange of position coordinates, psi of R2, R1, R3, etc. equal to minus psi of R1, R2, R3, etc., we say the wave function is antisymmetric, and then we will need to apply Fermi-Dirac statistics. Okay? Is it clear up to here?
সাইনটা কিভাবে আইডেন্টিফাই করা হয়?
ওইটা তো মানে যখনই তুমি পজিশনটা ইন্টারচেঞ্জ করবে তখনই দেখবে যে সাইনটা চেঞ্জ হয়ে গেল। ইট ইজ লাইক আ প্যারিটি অপারেটর। মানে it will happen. Why it will happen we will see, because of their spin, because Bose-Einstein statistics is followed by a particular group of particles which has a certain value of spin, and Fermi-Dirac statistics is followed by a different group of particles which again have a different value of their spin, and because of that when you interchange the positions the sign of the entire wave function changes. Okay, and that will allow you to determine whether the wave function is symmetric or antisymmetric. Position গুলো তো actually vector না, তাহলে ভেক্টর গুলোর পজিশন যখন তুমি চেঞ্জ করে দিলে যদিও সিমেট্রিক ফাংশন হয় তাহলে অ্যাজ আ হোল ওয়েভ ফাংশনটার কিছুই হবে না, কিন্তু যদিও অ্যান্টিসিমেট্রিক ওয়েভ ফাংশন হয় তাহলে ওয়েভ ফাংশনটার সামনে একটা নেগেটিভ সাইন, there is a 180 degree phase change. Okay, so that will make you determine whether the system is symmetric or antisymmetric, and then you will decide whether you will apply B statistics or FD statistics. Okay, so I think I will end today here. Okay, let me just let me do this last slide. Because this is otherwise this is relevant with what I just said. So when you have a symmetric wave function, you know that it is for particles having spin angular momentum either 0 or integral multiple of h cut. Okay, whereas if you have an antisymmetric wave function, you know that it is for particles having spin angular momentum half integral multiple of h cut. So it is all determined by the spin angular momentum of the particle. If the spin angular momentum is 0 or integral multiple of h cut, that is nh, where n can be 0 or any integer, then the wave function will be a symmetric one. If it is half integral multiple of h cut, that is n plus half h cut, where n is 0, 1, 2, 3, etc., then the wave function is antisymmetric. Okay, so you have to go back to the spin angular momentum of the particle in concern to determine whether you want to apply FD or B. Now, what is the consequence of this? The consequence is the categorization of quantum particles into two classes. So now we were dealing with quantum mechanics as a whole, different system applying quantum mechanics. But now that we see that depending on the spin angular momentum of the particle, the wave function representing the system of particles may be either symmetric or antisymmetric, and therefore we have to follow two different statistics to study the system, see how it evolves. The consequence is that we have to now categorize quantum particles into two classes. First is bosons and the other is fermions. So what are bosons? Particles with spin angular momentum 0, h cut, 2 h cut, 3 h cut, etc. And fermions are particles with spin angular momentum half h cut, 3 half h cut, 5 half h cut, etc. Here for bosons the wave functions are symmetric. For fermions the wave functions are antisymmetric. For bosons, Pauli's exclusion principle is not applicable. Bosons do not follow Pauli's exclusion principle. Fermions, Pauli's exclusion principle is applicable. So, there is no a priori restriction to the number of bosons in a given quantum state. Since bosons do not follow Pauli's exclusion principle, therefore there is no restriction to the number of bosons that can reside in a particular quantum state. There can be 2 or more photons in a particular quantum state. But for fermions, there is a restriction. Only one fermion per quantum state. So fermions are not friendly. Bosons are friendly. Bosons share space with other bosons, but other bosons only. Fermions do not share space with other fermions. If there is one quantum state, only one fermion will reside there. It will not allow any other fermions to come there. And finally, examples of bosons: photons with spin 1, phonons with spin 1, pi mesons with spin 0, whereas electrons with spin half, remember, one electron can have only one quantum state. 2 electrons cannot stay in the same quantum state. Okay, so electrons with spin half, positrons with spin half, mu mesons with spin half, pi meson spin 0 boson, mu meson spin half fermions, and there are other examples. I just gave you 3 examples of each. Okay, so this is the categorization of quantum particles with respect to the nature of their wave function, which again goes back to the value of their spin angular momentum. So depending on the spin angular momentum, the wave function will be symmetric or antisymmetric, and as a result, we have 2 classes of quantum particles, bosons and fermions. Okay, so a lot of things in one day. I'll end today's class over here.